So this in small tip video, I'm going to cover how to project texture onto the geometry and then break the geometry with the texture. So it's a projected texture that you can see on this pieces of the road, and as the pieces come apart, the texture is retained onto the pieces. So we're going to go into Maya and then see how this is done using the projection baking process for the texture. Okay, so we are going to start in Synthise just to track the camera. And here I have a very simple automatic tracking going on, which works for most parts. I have created a couple of trackers by myself. I needed one for the origin, so I kept up one over there because I wanted the ground plane aligned to this street that you see on the left hand side, because the road itself is an incline, right? So if you are going to use any kind of physics-based simulation, then this would help to have the actual orientation. And I also created one tracker here at the far end to have the slope reference for my barrier. And there are some trackers that you can see are also on the road, which would help the slope for the road. We don't need to worry about those too much right now, because our focus is going to be on the projection of the texture right at the area where there is going to be some simulation work done. So let's see what's going on with Maya. I have exported this scene from Synthise to Maya. So if I go to Maya, it's basically the same shot that you can see. I've just created one reference box here. So if you go to the quad view and then the perspective view, you can see that this is just the road that is going to be used for reference for projection and then for some simulation work. Okay, so what we need to do is find the reference from where we will project. So if you look at the whole shot here, um, it looks like that 384th frame, I think, has the ideal frame for the maximum coverage of the area that I'm looking for in the on the road. So that's the frame we will use for projection. So this is the image that I want projected on this geometry from this angle. So there are two things we need. One, we need to find that camera, because we would need to isolate that camera so that we can use that as a projector. We can't use the animated camera because it's moving around a lot. So if you select the camera here, you can see that our camera is moving at every frame, and that's not suitable for the projection that we have in mind. The other thing we need to do is find that frame which is 384. Well, right now you can't see the camera properly because the scale is too small. So let's go to the shape node, and I think it's in object display. Yeah, right here. And we'll change the scale to something like 50 so you can see where the camera is now. So if you let me select the camera and take a look at where the camera is. Okay, so this is where the camera is located. Now what we also want is isolate this particular angle of the camera. So I'll do Control D. That would duplicate the camera, and let's call this camera 2 as the projector. You can see that on this camera there is no keyframe, right? So when you start to move around on the timeline, you can see that you have the animated camera, which is separate from the projected camera, although they are both aligned at number 384, and the properties of this camera is also same as the camera on which this background is. So that's step number one. Step number two is to find this image. Now if you go to the image plane, you can see that there is a sequence of image coming from this location. So let's do this. Let's go over to that background and find that frame, which is 384, 312, 336, 372, 384 right here. So I'll control C this image because that's the one that we are going to project. And let me get rid of some of these nodes here, and control V for the image here, and I'll call this road projection. Right, so now we have both. We have the camera and we have the image. So let's project that. So we are going to project on this geometry. So I would select, let me save. I would select this geometry and make sure that there is no history on this, which I don't think there is, but let's just get rid of any history anyway. So we have the image, the geometry ready. So I'll right click on the geometry and I'll apply a new material, a new lambert, and this lambert will call this road texture. And the diffuse channel of this material is what we are going to apply the image, but not like normal UV based texture, but we are going to right click here on the file and create a projection. Okay, so now we have the projection node ready to take in information. So one information we want to give this node is that it's a perspective projection coming from a camera, and the camera is called the projector. The second thing they're looking for is the structure is looking for is the image. So let's give them the image from our projection node here, right here. So now we have the thumbnail here. You can see that there is an image attached to the node, and let's see how it looks on our projection. So let's get the projection on here. Now it looks a little blurry here, I believe, because the renderer is legacy. So if I change it to the viewport 2, you can see the clear image. Okay, so this is the angle of view that you see, because everything on the other side of the frame we are not going to see. We are only going to see everything that's on the left hand side of the of this particular image anyway. It's dark here in our viewport, so there are a couple of things going on, I think. Let me go over to the settings, go to the color management and enable color management, so that will give the linear workflow going. And the second thing we need is a light. So let's go to the lights. Ambient light will do, and if I hit 7 on my keypad here, now you can see that we have the projected image pretty much the same as the original image here. Now, this is where you would stop if there was nothing else going on, but since the road has some destruction coming up, if you move the road, as of now, you will see that the projection is staying constant, and that doesn't work when the road is going to go through the simulation. So what we need to do is first bake this texture that is currently projected like a flashlight, and we want to apply it onto the geometry itself. So how do we do that? So let's start. The first thing I'm going to do is create this view here for the hypershade and bring down the node that we need to work with, which is the road texture node, and open it up. So this is the node that we are going to use to bake the texture. So the workflow is that you select the node and you control select the geometry on which this is applied. So I haven't changed the name of this cube. It's still P cube 1. Let's do this first. Let's change it to road geo. All right, so select the road texture node and then control select the road geo. Go to edit here in hypershade, and from there select convert file texture. Open up the options and let's see what's going on here. Okay, I'll keep the 1024 as the projection or the texture resolution and JPEG is fine. So I'll convert this, and as soon as I do that, what you will see is there is a file created which is called projection1 road geo JPEG, and it's in our source image folder, which is right here. So if I open it, you can see that the file is like any other texture mapping that you see by default in any material, any geometry, except this looks very stretched, and that's because we are looking at it from the top down, whereas the ideal way to look at it is from the angle of the view. So let's close this, go back to Maya, and we don't need this anymore, so I'll close the hypershade. Now, if you move the image, the geometry, you will see that the texture is actually following the geometry, right? So that's exactly what we wanted to do, and we have achieved that. So now the testing phase. Let's figure out whether this works or not. Let's go to fracture because that's what I use for demolition in Maya. And I'm going to select this geometry, and I'm going to break it. So now you have Voronoi fracture created on this geometry. I need to create a simulation, the world where the physics will apply, and I'm going to connect the two. So the road geo, I'll connect to the simulation, and right away it's going to go as active. We don't want to have anything to happen to this road until something triggers. So I'll just make sure it is not active. In the break geo node, we currently have Voronoi fracture count is 100. Let's bring it up to 1000. Yeah, so I think that's good so far. And the couple of other things I want to change in the events, the collide break node, break one. So I'm going to delete that one. We are going to create our own structure here for the controlled destruction. All right, so let's add an animated event here called the bomb. Object filter we don't need because we already have prefactored the geometry. And this push modifier I'll also delete because we are going to create another event that will basically break, right? So in here, that one is going to be called, let's see, it will be activate in volume as the mechanism. So I think you have heard this before in my other tutorial, that when you are doing sim work in fracture, the renderer viewport 2.0 is not ideal. So you won't be able to see the nodes that you are creating here properly. So I'm going to go to the default viewport, and in my let's close this, we don't need that. In my outliner, I'll select volume, which you can now see. It's right here. I'm going to bring it in onto the road, and what I would like to do is have this demolition start right here at the far end. So I'll just hit S to mark the animation point there, and then let's say that for the first few frames, let's say 40 frames, nothing happens. So I'll actually what I would like to do is go back here and bring it down, just so that we are not seeing anything here. You know, we don't want it to touch the road yet. This is the side view, so it's below the road. On frame 40, I would like it to come up, and from that point on, say until frame 100, I would like it to come forward in our direction like this, right? So now let's see what we have created here. So if I play, you will see the color changing um, of the node. Now you see everything is demolishing right now down below because road is at the elevation and the gravity is applied. There are a couple of things I need to change. The very first thing is in the simulation, the um, the scale of gravity is not correct for our scale, so I'm going to do minus 9.81. The other thing is, let's see first how it plays, and then I'll tell you what else do I have in mind. But now you can see that the road is actually braking in a much more um, realistic way for the scale. I mean, it looks slow motion because we are actually playing every frame, but this is exactly what I would like to do. Now let's see at the frame 100 if I can move the uh, box a little further just so that we can have a little more destruction. Let's see. Yeah, so what I can do is apply a little bit of force so that there is a little push coming from the bottom. So let's go to events, and I'm going to add modifier assign, and in this assignment I'm going to choose velocity and give velocity of start with 5, maybe too much, but let's see. It's okay, I like it. It's yeah, I'm gonna live with what this is. This works well for what I have in mind. Okay, so now we have basically completed the work for simulation. What we need to do now is assign the texture, or I should say transfer the texture from the original geometry onto um, the pieces that are broken. Okay, so what I have done, this is nothing new. You have seen probably in my previous video on how to transfer the texture from the geometry that is not broken yet into all the pieces that you see here. And the workflow is fairly simple. You basically, let me just play this to a frame where you can see all these fragments coming alive. So these are all the pieces that were broken, as a part of this fracture. So workflow is fairly simple. You just select all of the 1,000 pieces that we have created, and then go to fracture, and there is shading texturing workflow. And here, basically, you are going to just transfer the texture from the original image or original geometry onto the respective fractured pieces. Now you can see here that the interior face is turned off right now, which is fine for now. But what also we do is if you go into the road shape, you have the interior face workflow here. So basically what I have done is I created a texture. It's a very simple texture for the interior faces. It's just a lambert with a very dark diffuse color, and I have dragged that over to the this field here, just literally by just dragging it middle mouse and dragging it, putting it over here, and that's how the interior faces will get the proper material. Otherwise, they would be transparent, and we don't want that. And I also created a let me just bring it up here so you can see. I created a grid that is black that you can see here at the bottom, just to have the background when the pieces come apart. So if you come to, for example, frame number 120 or 21, camera will see through these parts, where the pieces are no longer there. So I didn't want to have a um, complete transparency, so just to have that part covered, I have created this black material. um, let's see if there is anything else. Yeah, so basically now what we'll do is render it out, and I'm not going to render the entire 539 frames. um, just 120 frames would do to drive the point, because that's when all this breaking is happening anyway. And I have removed the image from this camera, so when we render, we will not be rendering the back image. As you can see here, this RGB is brought to none, so you don't see the image, and only part that will be rendered is this part. So when this is done, I'll show you what I did in Fusion, where I brought in that image first. So let me just take this out. So this is the image that you see on the left hand side, which came from Maya, and it is exactly the same file that we created there with the texture projection. What I did then is I created a mask, just to focus on the area of the breakage, because I really don't want to take this low resolution image to put on top of the entire, the front part of the road. So I have created this mask which goes onto the geometry. So now you have the high resolution image where the breaking hasn't occurred yet, and the mask is animated to follow the cracks. And yeah, so that's how I basically made the section of the road. And then the original sequence of the images is coming anyway. This is a linear file workflow here, so I'm just not using LUT. And that file is at the background, and of course, I had to change the linear from non-linear to linear, and then merged with the incoming file from Maya on top of the original image, and again deconverted that from linear to non-linear now, because I'm going to render it out as the MP4, and yeah, just created this projection texture text. But yeah, so this is the basically the file that you saw rendered out. So hope this was helpful. I'm still trying to find the same workflow for Houdini, and as soon as I find it, I'll post a video on that also. But yeah, for Maya, I just wanted to get this out, so you know how the projected texture can be used in the destruction sequence or when the geometry is in motion. Thanks a lot.